A Turkish journey and 5 contrasting marvels. Picture a land where geology looks like a fever dream, history spans back to the first farmers, and civilizations literally carved cities into stone. This is not a fantasy novel. It's Turkey. Our journey will wind through 5 very different landscapes that almost feel stitched together from different worlds. If you're expecting a sugar-coated tourism promo, think again. We're going to ask why people built underground cities, why millennia-old temples were buried on purpose, and why monks chose to cling to cliffs. Along the way, we'll find eerie echoes of Yemen's contrasts, fairy tale formations and forbidding mountains, mud brick architecture and cliff-top citadels, ancient rituals and turquoise coasts. Before we start, a question that hangs over this film. What makes people choose the impossible places? Sometimes the answer is faith, sometimes survival, sometimes simply because they could. Turkey will challenge everything you thought you knew about how and where people should live. Our first stop is Cappadocia in central Anatolia, a place that looks like the moon if the moon had caves carved into every cliff. The story starts around 30 million years ago when volcanoes belched ash across this plateau. Erosion then sculpted the soft tuff into bizarre pillars topped by hard basalt caps, creating the famous fairy chimneys. Iron oxides and minerals added hues of rose, cream, and green, so each valley looks like an impressionist painting. Early residents noticed that tuff is soft enough to carve but solid enough to hold its shape. They dug homes, stables, and churches directly into the cliffs. Many of these cave churches date between the 9th and 12th centuries and preserve Byzantine frescoes that still glow in the dim light. Yet the people of Cappadocia didn't just carve caves into cliffs. They went deep underground. Beneath the town of Derinkuyu lies a subterranean world that descends more than 75 meters and once sheltered thousands. Discovered in 1963, Derinkuyu extends through at least 8 accessible levels, connected by tunnels barely wide enough for one person. Archaeologists believe early Hittites started carving the complex and early Christians expanded it. The city had ventilation shafts, wine and oil presses, stables, kitchens, and even schools. Massive circular stone doors could be rolled into place to seal off passages during raids. It's a reminder that fear of invasion can drive astonishing engineering. Cappadocia is also a story of resilience. Early Christian communities hid here from persecution, turning valleys like Göreme into monastic complexes. The churches at the Göreme Open Air Museum, carved from tuff and covered with frescoes, show that art can flourish even under threat. Today, visitors drift above these valleys in hot air balloons at dawn, an almost frivolous pleasure compared to the hardship of the people who first dug into the rock. As balloons fill the sky, ask yourself, how many generations did it take to transform fear into beauty? Walking among these formations reveals details that get lost when you float above them. Each valley has its own personality. The skinny white pillars of Love Valley, the animal-shaped rocks of Devrant Valley, and the ochre cliffs of Rose Valley. Pigeon Valley takes its name from thousands of dovecotes carved into the rock. For centuries, farmers collected droppings from these birds to fertilize their vineyards. Locals still live in rock-hewn houses in villages like Şavuşan and Göreme, sharing their walls with swallows and stray cats. Towering above them is Uçhisar Castle, a fortress carved out of a single volcanic plug that once served as the region's highest lookout. The entire landscape is part of a UNESCO World Heritage Area, which means it's protected, but also heavily visited. Conservationists worry that the pressure of mass tourism is eroding frescoes and crumbling cave dwellings. Balancing access and preservation is an ongoing struggle, reminding us that today's adventures can become tomorrow's ruins if we're not careful. Leaving the chimneys behind, we cross the Anatolian plateau towards the Fertile Crescent. As the landscape flattens and browns, we approach a place where human history pushes back to the very beginning. If Cappadocia looks like another planet, Şanlıurfa feels like another era. Just outside the city lies Göbekli Tepe, a hilltop that forced archaeologists to rewrite their timelines. Beneath it are monumental stone enclosures built by hunter-gatherers 11,500 years ago. That makes this temple complex 6 millennia older than Stonehenge and the pyramids. Each ring of T-shaped pillars stands up to 5.5 meters tall, and is decorated with reliefs of wild animals. There's no evidence of farming or permanent settlement here, which means nomadic groups came together to build this sacred site. The project required planning. Researchers discovered the builders used geometry to lay out the circles, and likely conceived 3 of the largest enclosures as a single design. When you stand amid the stones, you're looking at the earliest known monument to human imagination. Şanlıurfa's old quarter swirls with stories. Down a lane lined with souvenir stalls is Balıklıgöl, the pool of sacred fish. According to legend, Nimrod attempted to burn the prophet Abraham on this spot. The flames miraculously turned into water, and the burning logs became fish, which explains the carp now considered sacred. Local lore says if you ever see a white fish, the gates of heaven will open. Needless to say, fishermen tread lightly. About 50 kilometers away lies Harran, a town where the houses look like upside-down beehives. Built of mud and straw without wood, these conical domes cluster together and have remained unchanged for centuries. Their design prioritizes comfort. The thick adobe walls keep interiors cool during blistering summers and retain heat during winter. Visitors can walk through preserved homes to see how entire families lived in a single room, storing grain in niches carved into the walls. The beehive houses echo the mud brick architecture found in Yemen's Hadramaut, yet reveal how people in a wood-scarce region solved the challenge of climate control. On a hill above Şanlıurfa sits a ruined citadel with 2 tall Corinthian columns. Some claim these pillars marked the throne of Nimrod. Others point out the ruins date back to the Hurrites around 3500 BC and were later expanded. The view from the top looks over gardens, reservoirs, and the plain stretching north. Even if the stories are embellished, it reminds us that every culture paints its own myths onto stone. Back in the heart of the city, the bazaar feels like a living museum. Vaulted caravanserais house shoemakers hammering soles, while spice merchants pour crimson sumac and dried chilies into paper cones. The Gümrük Han, once an Ottoman customs depot, hums with men sipping bitter coffee under grape-covered trellises as if time has stopped. Teenagers texting on smartphones weave around donkeys laden with sacks of cumin, proof that tradition and modernity can jostle along the same alley. The smoke of grilling kebabs mingles with the sweet scent of rosewater and baklava. In between shops, you find holy places. A small cave where local belief holds the prophet Abraham was born, its entrance draped with colorful cloths and crowded with pilgrims tying wishes to a tree. This intertwining of commerce and faith echoes the souks of Yemen's old cities, where market stalls sit in the shadow of mosques. Şanlıurfa's bazaar reminds us that sacred and mundane are not opposites but partners. From a temple older than agriculture to a pool of sacred carp, Şanlıurfa asks us to consider what we choose to preserve. It also prepares us for our next stop, a city of honey-colored stone that cascades down a mountain like a sandcastle. Perched on a rocky slope overlooking the Mesopotamian plains, Mardin looks both ancient and timeless. The city's buildings are hewn from locally quarried limestone that glows honey gold in late afternoon light. From a distance, Mardin seems like a single organism growing out of the mountain. But walk its streets and you enter a labyrinth of narrow, cobbled lanes winding up and down the slope. The old town is a maze of arches, terraces, and carved stone facades. It's easy to get lost. In fact, that's half the point. When enemies climbed these hills, the tangle of passages became a defensive network. At the eastern edge of the city stands the Lycian Monastery, named for the saffron that once grew nearby. Built on the site of an ancient sun temple and a 5th-century Roman citadel, the monastery served as the seat of the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchate for 640 years. Its domes, arcaded courtyards, and richly carved doorways show how the monks blended Roman, Byzantine, and local designs. Today, it remains a spiritual center where worshippers still chant in Aramaic. Walking through Mardin feels like stepping back centuries. The houses often rise 3 or 4 stories, with stone balconies and latticework windows. Carved door lintels bear intricate geometric patterns. In the heat of the day, the alleys are shaded and cool. At night, they echo with the call to prayer. Yemen has its own stone citadels perched on mountains, like the fortified villages of Haraz. Mardin offers a similar interplay between harsh landscape and delicate ornamentation. Hidden among these sandstone terraces are schools and sanctuaries that speak to Mardin's diverse heritage. The 14th-century Zinchiriye Medresesi, built for Sultan Isa, encloses 2 courtyards lined with arcaded rooms and a domed mosque. Its entrance portal is framed by muqarnas and vegetal motifs carved so finely they look like lace. Nearby, the 15th-century Kazimiye Medresesi preserves student cells opening onto a sunny courtyard. An octagonal pool in the center reflects the arches. Not far away, the 40 Martyrs Church continues to hold services for Mardin's Syriac Christian community. Inside, icons and carved stone columns recall a time when Aramaic chants filled the air. To understand the city's daily life, step into the Mardin Museum. Housed in a restored mansion, it exhibits Bronze Age and Assyrian pottery, alongside everyday objects like scales and trade seals, that illustrate how this hilltop once anchored a network of merchants stretching from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. From any rooftop you can see across the Tigris Plain into Syria, a reminder that borders here have long been fluid and contested. Mardin's mix of mosques, churches, and madrasas shows that coexistence is as much a part of its history as conflict. From Mardin's terraces, we now head west across the country to a very different landscape, a land of lush forests and precipitous cliffs, where Greek monks carved sanctuaries into the rock. The Black Sea region could hardly be more different from Mesopotamia. Moisture-laden winds from the sea feed forests of beech and fir that blanket the Pontic Mountains. Hidden in one of these valleys near Trabzon is the Sumela Monastery. Legend says 2 Athenian monks discovered an icon of the Virgin Mary in a cave here, and built a church around it. Over time, the monastery expanded into a complex of chapels, kitchens, student rooms, a library, and a spring that Orthodox Greeks considered sacred. Sumela isn't just remote. It clings to the face of a cliff. There is only one main entrance reached by climbing a zigzagging path up the sheer rock. The monastery had its own aqueduct, whose ruins still hug the cliffside. Inside, an inner courtyard leads to the rock church, built inside the cave and lined with centuries-old murals. Rows of monk cells and guest rooms extend along the cliff. 3 stories high, their balconies once made of wood now long gone. At the far end stands a tower that offered breathtaking views of the mountains, and when clouds rolled in, gave the monastery a mystic atmosphere. People often ask why monks would build in such an inaccessible place. Part of the answer is safety. Remote monasteries were less vulnerable to invasion. Part is devotion. Isolation fosters contemplation. There's also a hint of rivalry. Each order sought a location as dramatic as possible. Yemen's clifftop villages like Al-Hajara, perched on high plateaus, show a similar impulse to reach closer to the heavens. In Sumela, the interplay between man-made architecture and raw geology feels almost theatrical. Before it became a tourist icon, Sumela endured upheaval. Founded in the 4th century by Athenian monks Barnabas and Sophronios, the monastery remained active until 1923, when its Greek community was forced to leave under the Turkey-Greece population exchange. Decades of neglect followed, and vandals scratched away the faces of saints in the main chapel's frescoes. The complex still conveys the rigors of monastic life. Tiny cells connected by narrow corridors form a warren of rooms that make modern visitors grateful for their hotel rooms. Many say the best view of Sumela is from the road. From there, the entire structure seems to sprout organically from the cliff, a gray streak of stone against green forest. Its survival is precarious. Rockfalls frequently close the path, and climate change brings heavier rainfall and erosion. Will this cliffside sanctuary still cling to the mountain in another 1,000 years? That question lingers as we descend. In recent years, the monastery underwent restoration and reopened to visitors. Hikers now follow trails through Altendere National Park, crossing wooden bridges over waterfalls and hearing nothing but rushing water and birdsong. On certain days, priests hold mass inside the rock church, reviving rituals that date back more than a millennium. As you watch pilgrims light candles in a cave high above a forest, consider the continuity of faith across centuries. Leaving the cool mists of the Black Sea behind, we head for our final destination, a sun-drenched coastline where mountains plunge into the Mediterranean and ancient cities lie both on land and underwater. The Lycians, an ancient Anatolian people, took the concept of carving into rock to a new level. In the city of Myra, near modern Demre, they carved elaborate tombs into towering cliffs overlooking the theater. These tombs mimic wooden houses and temples. Some have reliefs depicting the deceased and their families. Archaeological evidence, coins, inscriptions, and the remains of fortifications shows that Myra existed at least by the 5th century BC and thrived under the Lycian League. A well-preserved Roman theater at the base of the Acropolis still displays rows of stone seats and a stage wall that once rose 2 stories. The city's decline came later due to earthquakes, floods, and Arab raids. To grasp the scale of Myra, step inside its theater. Carved into the natural slope, it once held up to 12,000 spectators for plays, competitions, and gladiatorial games. The semicircular seating, called the cavea, is divided by stairways that make it easy to navigate. Even today, a whisper from the stage can carry to the highest row. The theater was damaged by an earthquake in 141 AD, then rebuilt and embellished with reliefs of masks and mythological scenes. Archaeologists continue to discover inscriptions honoring patrons and benefactors. Above this cultural hub, hundreds of rock-cut tombs from the 4th century BC perch on the cliff. The Lycians believed that souls traveled by winged creatures, so they placed tombs high up to make the journey easier. Some facades were once painted vibrant reds and blues, and are decorated with reliefs of daily life. The lion's tomb stands out with its guardian motifs. Myra's most famous resident is Saint Nicholas, the 3rd century bishop, whose acts of generosity inspired the Santa Claus legend. The basilica in Demre dedicated to him still houses frescoes and intricate stonework. Pilgrims come to pay respects, even though the saint's bones were taken to Bari by Italian sailors in the 11th century. The city itself suffered a series of disasters, plague in the 6th century and repeated Arab raids, that eventually led to its abandonment. Silt from the Demre River buried much of Myra. Only the theater and cliffside tombs remained visible until excavations began. Today, modern Demre is a quiet agricultural town, where greenhouses line the roads and farmers sell pomegranates and olives at weekly markets. The silted mouth of the Myros River has created a bird sanctuary, teeming with herons and flamingos. History and agriculture coexist here. You can pick up a bag of peppers in the market and then walk a few minutes to stare up at Lycian tombs. This juxtaposition of past and present underscores how the ancient world never really disappears. It just becomes part of daily life. From Myra, we sail to the island of Kakova. Along its northern shore, an earthquake in the 2nd century sank part of the ancient harbor town of Dolciste. From the boat you can see stone walls, staircases, and the bases of houses disappearing into translucent blue water. Fragments of amphorae litter the seabed. Swimming is prohibited to protect the site, but the view from above is haunting. Nearby at Tersain Bay, the ruins of a Byzantine church sit on land, while submerged foundations reveal where shoreline once lay. We make a final stop at the village of Kalakoi, ancient Sumena. Built on a steep hillside and accessible mainly by boat, it offers a mix of Lycian, Roman, and medieval elements. Stone houses climb the slope towards the ruins of Sumena Castle, said to date to the 4th century BC, but modified during the Roman and Byzantine periods. The Knights of Rhodes later added walls to defend against pirates. Inside the castle is a small theater carved from rock, a reminder that even in war, the Lycians made room for culture. From the top you can see the entire bay, tiny islands, and the sunken city across the channel. A lone sarcophagus emerging from the water near the harbor hints at the earthquake that submerged the shoreline. The Lycian Coast is where you can swim over the remains of ancient walls in the morning and climb a castle after lunch. It's a place where sea and stone meet, just as Socotra's cliffs rise above Yemen's turquoise waters. The contrast between lush mountains and arid plateaus, between submerged ruins and lofty tombs, ties back to the theme we set at the beginning. A montage shows all 5 locations again: Cappadocia's chimneys, Göbekli Tepe's pillars, Mardin's terraces, Sumela's Cliffside Monastery, and the turquoise Lycian Coast. We've traveled from moonscapes to floodplains, from sacred pools to sunken cities. Along the way, certain patterns emerged. When stone is soft, people carve into it. When enemies threaten, they go underground or climb to inaccessible cliffs. When faith calls, they build monuments that defy time. The contrasts we saw in Turkey, arid versus lush, ancient versus modern, carved versus built, mirror the contrasts in Yemen, reminding us that landscape shapes culture in profound ways. There's one more question worth asking. How will these marvels fare in the next century? Tourism brings attention and revenue, but also where? Climate change threatens water supplies and increases erosion. Earthquakes remain a constant risk. Protecting these sites isn't just Turkey's responsibility, it's a global one. They're evidence of humanity's capacity for ingenuity when faced with harsh environments. As our journey ends, imagine the hands that chipped away at soft tuff in Cappadocia, the minds that aligned the stones at Göbekli Tepe, the monks who hauled timber up a cliff to Sumela, and the sailors who watched half of their town sink into the sea. These stories aren't frozen in time. They're warnings, inspirations, and reminders that people will always find a way to leave their mark, even in the most unlikely places.